Hey there, welcome. Tonight, we're digging into Norse mythology's worst jobs. The kind of work that makes you wonder if dying in battle might actually be the better career path. Let me know in the comments what small, strange thing helps you fall asleep. Now, get comfortable and let's begin. You wake early, though there's no real sunrise in this part of Asgard. Just a persistent golden glow that seeps through the thatched roofs like someone left a divine torch burning outside your hut. Today, like every day, you've been summoned to the privy quarter. The gods may be immortal, but their digestive systems are astonishingly mortal. And so are their standards for seating comfort, apparently. You trudge through the misty stone lanes of the realm's less glamorous district, known unofficially as the rear of the realm, toward your station. Outhouse carving. You're the artisan responsible for making sure Thor's backside doesn't get splinters and Odin's loo has enough rune-shaped ventilation slits to let in the breeze but not the ravens. Your tools are bone-handled chisels, worn smooth from years of scraping into stubborn, enchanted wood harvested from Yggdrasil's lower branches. Every slab hums faintly with a kind of tree soul grumble, which is incredibly motivating when you're already handling wood destined for latrine duty. At least the materials are magical. That's the one perk of your job. Your shavings are technically divine, which is more than you can say about your wages. As you settle into the day's commission, a gently curved seat for Frigg's quiet corner chamber, you start humming a tune to yourself. The rhythm keeps your chisel steady. According to one historical account, Viking craftsmen really did carve decorative seatboards with rosettes and knots to ward off evil spirits. The idea being, if your backside was going to be vulnerable, it should at least sit atop protective magic. You think that logic still holds. There's a pile of commissions waiting beside your bench. Loki has requested something sleeker, which, knowing him, probably means booby-trapped. Heimdall needs a frost-proof model that won't stick to his celestial haunches. And someone, for reasons you don't want to examine, wants an entire bench lined with swan feathers. It's best not to ask. Some of your co-workers are jealous of your position, if only because it's technically indoors. Others call you the rear guard, though they usually regret it once your chisel slips into their breakfast stew by accident. No one talks about promotion because, frankly, there isn't one. You're at the top of your very narrow game. You pause for a moment and lean back. A whisper of wind from above carries the scent of roasted elk and honeysuckle mead. It's lunchtime in the feasting hall, but your portion won't arrive for another 2 hours. Once the leftovers are deemed fit for mortal-grade digestion, sometimes you get a bone to gnaw on. Sometimes it's just broth. You've learned not to expect much more. Your hands are stained with resin, your knees ache from crouching, and your hair smells faintly of cedar and despair. You remember a time you thought you'd be a warrior, standing shoulder to shoulder with the gods, swinging a sword with poetic rage. Instead, here you are, a latrine artisan with artistic flair and chronic wrist pain. Life in the 9 realms is full of surprises. But you take quiet pride in your craft. You once carved an outhouse seat so well balanced and serene that Balder wept a single tear while using it. He later claimed it was because he'd seen a vision of the end times, but you prefer your version of the story. There's an old fringe belief among the Norse that everything, even dung, has a spirit. If that's true, then your work is a form of sacred channeling, a temple for waste. A sanctuary for those sacred 5 minutes where a god, stripped of glory and golden armor, contemplates their place in the cosmos, on a very well-sanded bench. Historians still argue whether Norse hygiene was surprisingly advanced or mostly exaggerated by later chroniclers. Some records suggest that Vikings had weekly bath days, fancy combs, and even used tweezers made from antlers. Others argue these details were added by writers keen to romanticize the seafaring raiders, who probably smelled like goat and smoked fish. What's clear is they cared, at least a little, and you, as an outhouse carver, are part of that caring infrastructure. A raven lands nearby, eyes you, then hops off. Not one of Odin's, probably just a judgmental regular. You wipe your brow, sit back on your heels, and regard your day's work. Smooth contours, no splinters, enough ventilation for a midsummer wind to drift through, but private enough to discourage accidental Heimdall sightings. Perfect. You carry the finished seat to the inspection shelf, dodging a steaming chamber pot, someone left with malicious intent. As you place it down, you whisper a small blessing, not to the gods, but to whoever sits on it next. May they be swift, silent, and splinter-free. Tomorrow, you'll start carving again. There's always a new commission, a new divine derriere to accommodate, and always, always, a line out the door. Asgard runs on mead, mischief, and well-maintained plumbing, and you, obscure and underpaid, are the silent throne-maker of it all. You're rinsing pitch from your fingers when a runner arrives, panting and pale, clutching a scroll tied with an absurd amount of gold thread. That only means one thing: a job commissioned by a high god with no understanding of reasonable expectations. You untie the scroll and squint at the curling runes. Stable duty. You sigh, deep and long. Not the outer stalls, which are just moderately unpleasant, but the inner sanctum, where Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged steed, resides. And when that creature evacuates, it is with the drama and scope of a midsummer thunderstorm. You pull on the thick leather apron, tie your hair back, and begin the pilgrimage to the stables. They lie just past the edge of the training fields, where immortal warriors are currently smashing each other with axes for the 6th time this morning. No one offers to help carry your tools. A few wave cheerfully, mostly because they're not the ones on manure duty today. The stables are enormous, built from enchanted pine and carved to resemble a temple, which is fair, considering the beasts inside are treated like minor deities. Your quarry waits in stall 1, snorting steam and kicking impatiently at the enchanted hay. Sleipnir towers, like a mountain with hooves, each leg rhythmically twitching in some secret war drum rhythm. You offer a polite nod. He doesn't nod back. Your job: scrape, sweep, deodorize. The scraping is with a wide bronze shovel imbued with runes for both strength and scent resistance, a vital enchantment. Because Sleipnir's droppings are the stuff of divine nightmares, not intoxicity, no, just scope, volume, velocity. You once saw a load dent a shield wall. The sweepings go to a special compost pile at the edge of Asgard, guarded by a disgraced light elf who now tends to divine fertilizer. No one asks why he was disgraced. No one wants to know. You remember a particularly humiliating morning when Loki transformed himself into a mare and got involved with a stallion. That encounter led to Sleipnir's birth. Historians still argue whether this story was symbolic, scandalous, or the Norse just had a very robust sense of humor. Either way, someone has to clean up after the consequences. Today's job involves more than just mucking out. There's a ceremonial grooming involved. Sleipnir is due for an inspection ride with Odin, and the Allfather insists on a shine so radiant it reflects visions. That's your task now: brushing every leg, polishing each hoof, and somehow getting the tangles out of his tail, which seems to contain fragments of forgotten dreams and a good handful of pine cones. You pull out your brush, made of unicorn mane and boar bristle, naturally, and get to work. Each leg takes an hour. You hum old lullabies while brushing, partly to keep your rhythm, partly to keep from losing your mind. One song is about a sailor who married a frost giantess and was later found frozen to his bedpost. A classic. Stable duty has one major hazard beyond the obvious bodily waste: Sleipnir's boredom. When he's left idle too long, he starts summoning illusions. Once, he made you think the compost heap was erupting with goblins. Another time, he gave himself a mane of blue fire and spooked every other creature in the barn. There's a reason you bring treats: apple slices soaked in mead, which he slurps with cartoonish joy. Mainstream accounts say Norse warriors prized horses almost as much as swords. They were signs of status, speed, and often were given funerary honors equal to their riders. But working behind the scenes, you've seen the reality. Horses get cranky, throw shoes, eat sacred scrolls, and kick without warning. You once saw a demigod launched into a tree by a disgruntled mare. Dignity did not survive the impact. Still, you finish the cleaning, stacking your tools beside the stall. Sleipnir's coat gleams. He snorts, less menacingly this time, and flicks his tail. You step back just in time to avoid another pinecone to the eye. As you trudge out, the sun creeps along the edge of the sky like it's embarrassed to be caught watching. Your boots squelch. You're covered in divine muck. Your shoulders ache, and there's straw in places straw has no business being. Still, there's something oddly noble in it. You kept the stables of the gods from turning into a festival of filth. You made a chaos horse presentable. You will probably still be underpaid. At the edge of the path, you see a group of younger recruits drawing lots. Someone's just pulled kitchen fish scraper, and he wails like he's been sentenced to hell itself. You smile quietly. They've yet to realize that every job here is the worst one. It's just a matter of which scent lingers longest in your hair. You're up before the ravens. Yes, those ravens, scrubbing your nails with sand because soap's a luxury you haven't earned yet. Today, you've drawn what many call the quiet one, but there's nothing peaceful about it. You're the message runner between realms, not the magic kind, with sparkles and teleportation. No, you hoof it on foot, across terrain that would chew up boots and burp up bones, carrying scrolls sealed in wax and the threat of divine wrath if you're late. Your first delivery today, a rolled-up note from Frigg to Skadi. Yes, the goddess of foresight wants to send a polite warning to the goddess of skis. Something about overlapping domain rights over a stretch of winter woods. You don't ask questions. You just tuck the scroll inside your tunic and start walking. The Bifrost is closed today. Thor cracked it last week, chasing a frost giant with an unpaid gambling debt. So your path winds through lesser-known terrain, frost plains, troll tracks, and at least one invisible bog. You keep one eye on the road and the other on the tree line. Something always watches, always. The historians often depict Norse messengers as noble and swift-footed, romanticized, like Hermes with a beard. In truth, you're more like a postal mule in wool socks. Your feet are blistered from yesterday's volcano-side detour, and you haven't had a proper breakfast in 2 days because the kitchen staff declared a goat strike. Something about unfair milking quotas. Your boots crunch over ice that sings when stepped on, an eerie melodic hum that sets your nerves twitching. You pass a marker stone bearing the likeness of a wolf's jaw, just decoration. You hope, though you clench your side blade tighter anyway. Halfway through the journey, you find a resting stone, a flat slab warmed by some minor sun deity in retirement. You sit, unwrap a damp piece of flatbread, and chew while watching the clouds argue overhead. They look like they're having more fun than you. By the third league, your right boot begins to leak. That would be manageable, except you're now in a valley where it rains sideways. You wrap the scroll in a waxcloth because the gods may forgive lateness, but they don't forgive soggy letters. Ask the last guy. His punishment involved being turned into a percussive weather vane. Fringe reports claim that ancient Norse runners sometimes used trained reindeer or enchanted boots to speed their passage. You've seen neither. What you have seen is a man tape a squirrel to each foot and call it divine transport. That ended in bandages and tears. You spot Skadi's hunting lodge, an icicle-spined fortress of snow and granite perched on the cliff like it's daring the mountain to blink. You trudge up the last switchback, wheezing like an undercooked sausage, and knock on the shield-sized door. No one answers. You knock again. The door creaks open, revealing a single white fox who studies you with narrowed eyes and then pads inside. Taking that as permission, you step in. The air inside bites. Skadi's idea of interior warmth involves exactly 0 fireplaces and a general disdain for comfort. You find a side table carved from glacis, leave the scroll there, and whisper a quick, respectful phrase. You've learned your lesson. Never hand-deliver anything to a hunt goddess unless you want to be chased back down the trail. Your return trip is marginally less awful, though you nearly get flattened by a group of dwarves hauling a wagon of glowstone. They're grumbling about overtime and mutter curses involving pickaxes and celestial quotas. You wave politely. They ignore you. Near Asgard's edge, a hawk swoops down and drops a ribbon into your hand. It reads, in Frigg's tidy script, thanks and sorry for the terrain. Reward pending. You crumple it with a tired smile. Pending always means, don't hold your breath. Still, when you finally stumble into the courtyard and collapse by the fountain, just missing an elderly Norn mid-washing, you feel that slight flutter of pride. You did your job. You didn't die. You remembered not to eat the glowing berries along the way. The scroll was delivered. Your toenails are intact, mostly. Historians still argue whether Norse couriers were trained from youth, chosen by omens, or simply drawn from whoever looked the least busy. But no matter the truth, you're part of the glue that keeps this bizarre, collapsing universe of gods and monsters functioning. You may be muddy and cold, and sporting what is very possibly a squirrel bite on your ankle, but you matter. At least until someone loses another bet and you're reassigned to Eelgut's scribe duty again. You wake up to the sound of dripping, never a good omen in your line of work, especially when it's not rainwater, but the slow, thick plop of mead-soured drool sliding off the beard of an unconscious Einherjar. That's right, today you're on tavern cleanup duty, a glamorous role fit for the lowliest of the low, the after-party scrub. The great halls of Valhalla may be etched in saga and song, but the morning after scent is never mentioned in the myths. It's part battle sweat, part mead burps, and part something died in the stew pot and came back angry. Your job, make it look like Odin himself could eat off the floors again. Not that he ever would. He prefers clouds. Armed with a bucket carved from a single bare skull, possibly still haunted, and a rag soaked in pine tar and regret, you set to work. The long table is littered with bones, chicken legs, a disturbingly lifelike statue of Loki made of bread crusts, and exactly one dented helmet filled with mashed turnips. You don't ask, you just toss it all into the fire pit, hoping it's hungry. According to most sources, the Norse were surprisingly clean for the time. Historical fact. They bathed weekly, which was downright luxurious compared to most medieval standards, and even had tweezers, ear spoons, and combs made from animal bones. But that didn't extend to post-feast responsibilities. That's where you come in. You are the soap behind the saga. While sweeping, you accidentally trip over a spear still embedded in the floorboards. One of the warriors must have gotten excited during a toast and flung it like a dart. You lean it gently against the wall and make a note to duck in that area for the rest of the week. Just as you're lifting a mead-slickened bench upright, you hear the unmistakable sound of Heimdall's snore echoing down the corridor. Even the all-seeing has to nap sometimes. You suppose it's comforting. But it also means no one's going to notice if you throw out the suspiciously sentient pie from last night's dessert table. You've worked up a decent sweat by midday. The pine tar rag now resembles a sea monster. You pause for a quick break, leaning against the banister of the balcony where Odin occasionally gives speeches. Beneath it lies an ocean of spilled drink and shattered pride. You mop in circles and hum a lullaby sung to you by a very drunk Valkyrie who once mistook you for a goat. Fringe accounts from travelers mention that the Norse sometimes sprinkled herbs or even burned juniper branches indoors to mask unpleasant smells. You would kill for a handful of juniper right now, especially after finding an overturned chamber pot beneath a fur-lined chair. The chair, sadly, did not survive. Down in the kitchens, you try to barter for some scented wax, but the head cook just laughs and hands you a charred onion. Best I can do, she says. You don't argue, you tie it to your belt like a talisman. Historians still argue whether these cleanup roles were handled by mortal slaves, divine underlings, or unlucky Einherjar in training. All you know is you didn't die gloriously in battle, just to scrub roast beetle from Thor's chin rest. But here we are. By late afternoon, the hall starts to resemble a place that might have once hosted dignity. The tables gleam with oil, the bones are neatly stacked for tomorrow's hound feast, and someone, possibly you, has rearranged the shields on the wall into a smiley face. No one will notice. No one ever notices the cleaner, unless something smells weird or someone slips on troll bile. You trudge back to your quarters, passing to Valkyries arguing over whether roast eel counts as a proper breakfast. One sees you and wrinkles her nose. You reek, she says flatly. You bow and reply, just trying to smell like the gods. She doesn't laugh, but the other one snorts into her goblet. Small victories, as you remove your boots, carefully, slowly, because one toe has turned the color not found in nature. You wonder about your place in the grand order. No one sings about the scrubbers, the polishers, the ones who keep Asgard from falling into absolute filth. But without you, the gods would be slipping on rib bones and marinating in their own leftovers. Maybe tomorrow you'll get reassigned to something slightly more heroic, like wolf-tooth extraction or moon polishing. You've heard rumors, but for now you light a candle, sniff your onion of protection, and whisper a lullaby of lye, soap, and floor wax. You are rudely awoken by the sound of the rooster. That rooster, gulling Camby, the golden feathered squawk machine that roosts atop Valhalla and heralds every sunrise like it's Ragnarok itself. He doesn't just crow, he declares, full-throated and theatrical, as if he's auditioning for an opera set entirely on fire. Today's shift, bridge maintenance. You haul your aching limbs out of bed, still smelling faintly of vinegar and troll soup. A bridge seems harmless enough until you remember which one Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, the glimmering, shimmering, always fragile connection between Midgard and Asgard that crackles underfoot and looks like someone melted a Skittles factory onto a lightning bolt. Your job is to patch up the bits where careless gods, eager spirits, and wayward goats have scuffed, chipped, or outright shattered divine geometry. You carry a small satchel of celestial resin, sticky stuff that smells like peppermint. As you step onto the bridge, you're hit with the disorienting shimmer of Bifrost's light. It's like staring into a soap bubble held up to the sun while riding a tilt-a-whirl. You blink until the nausea passes, then crouch by a cracked section and start dabbing on resin. Historians still argue whether Bifrost was envisioned as a literal bridge or a metaphor for cosmic order, an energetic pathway between worlds. Either way, it's temperamental. Today, a fox from Midgard had apparently tried to cross and exploded into confetti. You sweep up the remnants and mutter an apology to the wind. Bifrost was said to be guarded by Heimdall, ever watchful and ever handsome in that too-much-liner kind of way. But he doesn't do patch jobs. That falls to you. You're the cosmic janitor of the most photogenic bridge in the 9 realms. You pause to chisel out a wad of what appears to be congealed Valkyrie lip gloss, hardened into the cracks. The bridge trembles under your feet as someone or something crosses from the other end. You squint and see Thor approaching, dragging his goat-drawn chariot, shouting something about pickles and war. He barrels past, nearly knocking you off the edge. You cling to the railing, muttering that one day you'll fix a trapdoor right beneath his usual lane. Fun fact, the Norse were actually quite skilled at bridge building. Archaeological evidence shows sophisticated wooden structures using pegged joints and logged supports. You, on the other hand, are dabbing radiant goo on literal rainbow fractures, and your knees hurt. A soft vibration starts humming beneath you. Uh-oh. That usually means Loki's about to make an entrance. Sure enough, he appears a few meters away, somehow riding a unicycle made of serpents. Nice job, Patchy, he calls out, balancing upside down and juggling fish. You nod grimly. You've learned not to react. Encouragement is fuel for his nonsense. As he disappears in a cloud of purple fog, the bridge groans. You seal another crack just in time, whispering to the resin like it's a nervous cat. It glows softly, then hardens. Crisis averted. For now, midday arrives, and with it, a break. You sit on the edge of the bridge, with your feet dangling dangerously into the infinite sky. Below you stretches Midgard, hazy and blue. Somewhere down there, people are doing sensible jobs, farming, baking, dying of plague. You sigh wistfully. For lunch, you unwrap a packet of stale rye bread, and something that may have once been cheese. A gift from the kitchen staff, probably meant as an insult. You chew anyway, teeth grinding like tectonic plates. Quirky, fringe, belief time. Some late medieval texts claimed that Bifrost might not have been rainbow-colored at all, but blood-red, a searing arc lit by flames. That version is oddly satisfying, considering your sunburn. You pull your sleeve down over your forearm, which now glows faintly fuchsia. Occupational hazard. A shadow passes over you. A Valkyrie, Sigrun, you think, swoops down and lands nearby, feathered cloak rippling behind her. You missed a spot, she says, pointing with her spear. You glance at the micro fissure and nod. She lifts off again, leaving behind the scent of frost and extremely judgmental hair oil. You fix the crack. Of course you do, because, toward evening, the bridge begins to settle. Most of the traffic slows to a trickle, just a few ravens and one berserker doing cartwheels for some reason. You collect your tools and whisper a quiet thanks to the structure itself. You've come to think of Bifrost as temperamental but loyal, like a swan with anxiety. As you step off the bridge, your boots crackling with residual magic, you pass Heimdall, who gives a brief nod. He never says much, but the nod, that's basically a standing ovation. You head home, glowing faintly with rainbow dust, your back aching, your fingers sticky, and your soul vibrating slightly from contact with celestial physics. Another ungrateful day of cosmic repair behind you. You wake to a sound that should not exist, a sort of wet, grinding squeak, like someone trying to sharpen a spoon using moss and regret. You know that sound. You know it deep in your bones. It's the sound of dragon waste removal day. Down you go, boots reluctantly sliding across morning frost, toward Nidhogg's trench. Technically, the great dragon lives in the roots of the world tree. In practice, he lives in a hole full of death, rot, and an astonishing amount of bodily functions. Today, you're the one with the shovel. You trudge to the edge of the pit and peer down. The stench rises like a sentient fog. Nidhogg's eye swivels toward you, lid half closed, giving you the lazy glare of a creature who has digested a dozen corrupt souls before breakfast. You nod, he belches. It's going to be one of those days. Your task is to clear out the remains of whatever, and whoever, he's been gnawing lately. Nidhogg's diet isn't picky. Oathbreakers, the envious, and occasionally a misfiled accountant from Alfheim all end up here. The dragon's breath smells like mildew and ancient betrayal. You tie a strip of cloth over your nose. Though it does nothing to stop the smell, it merely flavors it. Armed with a wooden rake carved from cursed pine, you begin scraping. Bones, melted helmets, something that might have once been a harp, all go into the wheelbarrow. You can't help but notice that one of the skulls has braces, not metaphorical ones, dental ones. Either dentistry exists in hell, or someone very unfortunate wandered into the wrong afterlife. You toss the skull aside and get on with it, quirky tidbit. There's a fringe belief in obscure Icelandic manuscripts that Nidhogg occasionally swaps his gnawing duties with a cousin serpent named Flarbjorn. Supposedly, Flarbjorn is more polite and leaves thank you notes carved into rib bones. You pray for that version, but alas, Nidhogg's in residence today, snorting through his nose holes like a bored volcano. The dragon shifts, and a massive tail thuds down beside you, flinging bits of soggy underworld shrapnel into your face. You sigh, wipe off what you hope is only ectoplasm, and keep raking. There's a debate among scholars whether Nidhogg is purely allegorical, a symbol of decay eroding moral foundations, or an actual mythic creature tasked with cosmic recycling. The way your boots are dissolving suggests the latter. You make a mental note to demand hazard pay. Again, the work goes slowly. Every time you clear a patch, more stuff oozes down from higher branches. You suspect some mischievous spirit is deliberately dumping above you, possibly the squirrel who ferries insults between Nidhogg and the eagle at the top of the world tree. You pause to shake a fist upward, but only get a pinecone to the eye in response. Midday passes, and you're granted a break. You collapse onto a relatively clean rock and dig into your lunch. Fermented goat milk and a dried meat roll the consistency of a boot. You chew, watching Nidhogg gnaw at the roots again, his teeth grinding like glaciers in a blender. You wonder if he ever flosses. A Valkyrie passes by overhead, pinching her nose. She doesn't stop, you understand. You wouldn't stop either. By afternoon, you reach a particularly stubborn patch of sludge that resists all scraping. With great effort, you jab your rake into it and dislodge a chunk that lets out a high-pitched yodel. It's a severed head, still singing. You apologize politely and tuck it under a cloth. The Norse afterlife has a lot of weird customer service complaints. The sun dips low, though in this realm, sun is more of a concept than an actual orb, and the trench finally seems manageable. You empty your last barrow of horrors into the dumping chute carved from petrified worm bone, then douse your boots in ash water to stop the sizzling. Nidhogg yawns and flicks a chunk of shoulder blade at you by way of thanks. You take it as a compliment. It's more than Loki ever gave you. You wipe your hands, which are now stained a shade of purple no human language can describe. As you walk away from the pit, you hear a soft burbling behind you, a fresh deposit. You do not turn around, you simply keep walking, head held high, full of pride, nausea, and the distinct awareness that this job will haunt your dreams. Back at your quarters, you scrub with sand, soap, and prayer. The smell clings. You wrap yourself in your thickest wool and sit quietly, feeling the vibration of Nidhogg's gnawing through the soles of your feet. Another day cleared, another trench survived. You awaken with a groan, your shoulders aching from yesterday's encounter with dragon detritus. But today, you're headed somewhere new, or at least differently unpleasant. There's a knock at your door, and a scroll is shoved through the crack. You unroll it with sleep-heavy fingers. The message reads, "To the mead-stirring pits, bring gloves." You'd rather be reassigned to cleaning Fenrir's nail clippings, but orders are orders. You gear up, thick apron ladle, and the gloves in question, and head toward the vast wooden hall where divine mead is brewed in massive, steaming vats. You'd think this would be the most enviable job in the 9 realms. But you, of course, know better. As you arrive, a wave of hot, fermented sweetness smacks you in the face like an overly affectionate honey badger. The mead here isn't for sipping around fires. No, this is sacred stuff, the kind that's dripped from Cavasir's remains, stirred with rune-etched paddles, and guarded by overzealous elves who think health codes are a personal attack. Your job, to stir it, continuously, with a wooden pole the length of a longship's mast. Why does it need constant stirring? Because if you let it settle, the top congeals into a crust that could theoretically host its own ecosystem. And when it does, it emits a gas so potent it once knocked out a whole table of berserkers mid. The hall is cavernous, lit by hanging lanterns, shaped like upside-down goat skulls. Steam rises in roiling clouds from the rows of bubbling cauldrons. You grip the stirring pole with both hands and begin the slow, repetitive churn, clockwise, always clockwise. Counterclockwise means invoking an accidental prophecy, and those are frowned upon before lunchtime. Historical sidebar: mead was, in fact, a common drink across Norse cultures, often consumed during rituals, treaties, and celebrations. But what the myths leave out is the logistics. Someone had to make the stuff. And that someone is currently you, arms aching as you stir a vat the size of a burial mound. Near you, another worker, an elf named Grell, whistles a tune that sounds suspiciously like an insult. You ignore him. He once dared to taste the mead straight from the spigot, and spent 3 days speaking only in bird languages. No one wants that again. A fringe tale tells of a cursed batch of mead, once fermented with the wrong herbs, possibly mistletoe or fermented giant toenail. The result was a drink that made anyone who consumed it weep uncontrollably, while believing they were an egg. The batch had to be sealed in stone jars and hurled into the sea. You often wonder if one of those jars might wash up again, just to ruin someone's wedding. You stir faster, sweat trickling down your spine. A puff of steam explodes upward and burns your eyebrow clean off. You do not react. That's just Tuesday. There's scholarly debate about the myth of Kefir, the being whose blood was used to make the original mead of poetry. Some historians claim it symbolizes the exchange of wisdom through sacrifice. Others argue it's simply an elaborate metaphor for very bad wine. Either way, you're knee-deep in it now, literally. The floor is sticky. Your boots make suction noises with every step, and you're fairly certain a spider just winked at you. Midday comes. You're granted a break, but not a place to sit, since every bench is already occupied by sweating, hallucinating alchemists trying to balance rune tablets on their knees. You sip water, not mead, not again, and bite into a barley cake that crumbles like regret. Across the room, a dwarf drops a ladle and shouts, "It's alive," before being escorted out by two ravens wearing aprons. Back at your station, you resume the stirring. Your arms are lead, your mind a fog of honeyed fumes and mild dehydration. Occasionally, the mead speaks, not in words, of course, but in shifting ripples that form the vague outline of a prophecy you'd rather not interpret. You blink and shake your head. You're fairly certain one of the vats winked at you. That's never a good sign. Near the end of your shift, the master brewer, a woman named Snera, whose eyebrows are rumored to have their own postal code, appears behind you. She sniffs, nods, and mutters, "Acceptable," before vanishing again in a swirl of cape and bees. You take it as high praise. As you stagger out of the hall, your skin sticky, your hair saturated with steam, you pass a pile of discarded stirring rods, each warped and cracked by years of use. You add yours to the top of the heap. It groans under the weight, then settles ominously. Walking home, the wind feels icy against your mead-damp skin. Your fingers twitch from the endless stirring motion, and you wonder if they'll ever move normally again. Probably not, but at least you didn't taste it. That's something. That's survival. You wake the next morning with arms like overcooked noodles, and a vague scent of fermented socks clinging to your skin. But there's no rest for the sweat-soaked. Another job awaits, and today you've been summoned to serve as one of the storm watchers. At first, the title sounds noble, heroic even. Maybe you'll be standing atop windswept cliffs, hair blowing in the breeze, interpreting the clouds like a poetic Thor. But then, you arrive at the site, a squat tower made of moss-covered stone and bird droppings, and realize your job is exactly what it sounds like, watching storms, literally, for hours. You're issued a fur-lined cloak, a notched wooden tablet, and a piece of charcoal that smells suspiciously like burnt fish. You climb the rickety spiral stairs of the tower, where the scent of mildew and mold meets you like an old frenemy. At the top, there's a stool that wobbles, a viewing slit barely large enough to see through, and a horn you're supposed to blow if anything interesting happens. They don't define interesting. That's part of the fun. From here, your duty is to observe weather patterns on behalf of the gods. Apparently, there's been a recent uptick in rogue thunderbolts and suspicious fogs. Odin thinks it's the giants testing magical interference, or just being petty. Either way, someone has to monitor the sky, and today, that someone is you. You settle in. The clouds roll lazily past, as unhurried as a turtle on vacation. Every once in a while, there's a flicker of lightning far to the north, but it's disappointingly distant. Still, you dutifully scratch rumble near horizon, low menace onto your tablet, and return to squinting. Fact, break. The Norse were fascinated by weather. It governed their seafaring, their farming, and their seasonal raiding schedules. But unlike today's meteorologists, they didn't have radar. Instead, they relied on seers, omens, and people like you. Unpaid interns with questionable vision and a horn that sounds like a sick goose. Several hours pass. You amuse yourself by naming clouds. That one looks like Loki turning into a fish. That one, a goat having an existential crisis. Your stomach growls. You pull out your packed lunch, a hard biscuit and a wedge of cheese that's begun to develop sentience, and nibble cautiously. Behind you, a raven lands on the parapet and eyes your food. You sigh and hand it a crumb. It snatches the offering, caws something that might be sarcastic, and flaps off. Probably a spy, probably Hugin, or maybe Munin. You never remember which one is memory and which one is thought. Doesn't matter, they're both nosy. Somewhere below, thunder rumbles more aggressively, and you perk up. Could it be a real storm? You leap to the slit and peer out, heart thumping like a war drum. The clouds are darkening now, and wind whips across the sky like a toddler having a tantrum. Lightning forks, thunderclaps. This is it. This is your moment. You lift the horn to your lips, inhale deeply, and immediately choke on a dead bug. After several seconds of coughing and existential regret, you manage a wheezy blast that sounds less like a call to arms and more like a yak sneezing. Nonetheless, the nearby outpost hears it and rings a bell in response. You've done it. You've warned the realm. You bask in your tiny, lonely glory as hail begins to fall sideways. There's an old tale about a storm watcher who got too invested in his job. He started naming the storms, writing sonnets to the clouds, and eventually claimed to have fallen in love with a particularly shapely thunderhead. He vanished one night, and legend says he was taken by the wind to live among the vapors. More likely, he just fell off the tower while doing yoga. Historians still argue whether Norse weather omens were part of an organized belief system or just a convenient excuse for why raids failed. Either way, you're beginning to understand the madness that comes from staring at clouds for too long. By nightfall, the storm has passed, leaving behind a sky the color of wet charcoal. Your hands are numb, your notes smeared from wind and drizzle. As you climb down, your joints pop like old floorboards. The base of the tower greets you with a generous helping of mud, which you promptly slip in, face first. You lie there for a moment, considering a career change, perhaps ship ballast. Back in your quarters, you rinse off the grit and moss, wrap yourself in a dry fur, and stare blankly at the wall. You've watched storms, you've sounded the horn, you've inhaled more bird guano than any physician would recommend, and tomorrow, if the gods are still feeling whimsical, you might be assigned to counting snowflakes with your tongue. Still, at least it wasn't mead again. You're barely awake when the knock comes. 3 sharp raps, the kind of summons that means you don't get to say no. You shuffle to the door, still rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and find a stern-looking runner from the palace holding what looks suspiciously like a giant sack. Without a word, he shoves it into your arms and points towards the harbor. The sack wriggles. You are today's sea serpent feeder. This is not a glamorous role. There's no wreath of laurels, no heroic songs in your honor. It's a job usually given to people who have annoyed someone important, but aren't yet important enough to execute. Your task is to row out to the fjord, find the anchored chain that marks the gods' baiting grounds, and feed whatever lurks beneath. It's still early morning, the sun struggling to melt the frost, clinging to the grass. You stagger down to the docks, sack over shoulder, feeling the weight shift unnervingly as its contents wriggle again. You're hoping for fish. You're guessing it's not fish. At the docks, you're met by an elderly fisherman with the sort of expression that suggests he's already regretting seeing you alive. Without a word, he hands you a battered rowboat and a pair of oars that creak like haunted bones. The smell, wafting from the sack, is ambitious. A cocktail of brine, decay, and whatever died in here last week. You row out into the gray water, the fjord stretching wide and silent except for the rhythmic slap of the oars. Mist curls along the surface, and somewhere deep beneath, something shifts. The water ripples, slow and deliberate. You try not to think about the fact that this job exists for a reason. Historical fact time. The Norse believed in vast serpents dwelling in the ocean. The most infamous being the Midgard serpent, said to circle the entire world. Sailors told stories of its coils brushing against their ships, and eyes the size of shields watching from the deep. Whether they were allegories, hallucinations, or just really big eels, the fear was real enough to inspire feeding rituals. You find the chain, a barnacle-encrusted monstrosity, rising from the depths, swaying slightly with the current. The instructions are simple. Hook the sack to the lower ring, drop it overboard, and then leave, quickly. You lean over, trying to thread the leather tie through the ring, while keeping your other hand firmly on the boat's side. The sack jerks violently, as though whatever's inside just realized it's not going to the beach for fun. You mutter something halfway between a prayer and an apology, and shove it into the water. It sinks fast. The water stills for a moment, then bubbles, large ones. The surface swirls, and a single, glistening shape slides just below your boat. It's big. It's bigger than your boat. Your breath freezes in your throat. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, the chain pulls tight. Whatever's below is taking the offering. The boat rocks gently, then harder, and you have the distinct impression of being inspected. Two pale shapes, like moons, hover just under the surface. Eyes, definitely eyes. Quirky tidbit. Some old seafarers swore the serpent didn't just eat the bait, it remembered faces. They claimed that if you fed it once, it would recognize you and either spare your ship or deliberately flip it later, depending on its mood. You find this knowledge neither comforting nor reassuring. The chain slackens, the water calms. You take that as your cue to leave and begin rowing back, very much resisting the urge to look behind you. Historians still argue whether these feedings were genuine offerings to a supernatural being, a way to appease dangerous marine life, or just a very elaborate excuse to dump refuse into the sea. Halfway back to shore, the fisherman is waiting, pipe in mouth, expression as unreadable as a rune carved by a drunk. You tie up the boat, climb onto the dock, and hand him the empty rope. He grunts approval or indigestion, it's hard to tell, and waves you off. You make your way back to your quarters, damp from sea spray and smelling faintly of rotting fish heads. Your stomach lurches every time you remember those pale eyes under the water. You've heard whispers that the serpent sometimes follows its feeders, trailing them through the fjords for days. But you tell yourself that's just another campfire story. Still, you might keep your window shut tonight. You wake to the unmistakable sound of someone banging two ladles together outside your door. This is rarely the herald of good news. When you open it, you find a cheerful stable hand holding a bucket of something that smells like an angry cheese. "Congratulations," he says, with the sort of grin that suggests he is delighted. This is not his turn. You're on mead vat duty. This is not the pleasant sort of mead vat job you might imagine, involving sipping honey wine in the firelight. No, this is the cleanup shift, the one every brewer dreads. You have been tasked with crawling into the near-empty fermentation barrels, scraping away the thick, sticky sediment that has been slowly turning into something alive. It is warm in the brewery, oppressively so. The smell of fermenting honey and yeast clings to your hair before you've even stepped inside. Rows of great wooden barrels line the floor, each bound with iron hoops and humming faintly as the living brew inside bubbles. The head brewer, a man with forearms like tree trunks, hands you a long-handled scraper and gestures towards one open vat. This particular vat is empty of liquid, but its insides are coated with a hardened crust the color of old gold. You climb the short ladder and step inside, your boots sticking slightly to the tacky floor. It's hot, very hot. Within minutes, you're sweating like you've been wrestling a troll in a sauna. Mainstream fact: mead really was a cornerstone of Viking social life. Brewed from honey, water, and sometimes fruits or herbs, it was central to feasts, oath-swearing ceremonies, and religious offerings. The drink was stored in large vats like these, and cleaning them was critical to ensuring the next batch didn't turn into vinegar or something worse. The work is monotonous but brutal. Every scrape sends tiny flecks of crystallized honey flying into your hair and beard. Your arms ache, your back twinges, and the air grows thick with the smell of warm yeast. Every now and then, a lump of hardened residue falls and splats against your shoulder with the sensation of being hit by a caramelized snowball. Quirky tidbit. Some brewers in old villages swore that a truly great mead could only be made if the previous batch's sediment was left for exactly 9 days before cleaning. Less than that, and the new mead would be weak. More than that, and the barrel would develop what they called the brewer's curse, a kind of sour rot that spoiled the whole batch. Whether this was genuine chemistry or just superstition is anyone's guess. After an hour, you are drenched in sweat, your shirt plastered to your back. You think of the warriors in the sagas charging into battle, all fire and glory. And then you think of yourself, elbow deep in fermented honey crust. Historians still argue whether people romanticize Viking life too much. If so, jobs like this could end the debate quickly. The head brewer checks your progress occasionally, leaning in with an approving nod before vanishing back to his cauldron. You keep scraping. Your hands feel sticky, even through the rough cloth gloves. A bee wanders in through an open window, circles your head a few times, and then lands on the barrel wall beside you. Probably confused about why the hive smells like human. Eventually, the last stubborn chunk of crystallized sediment gives way, tumbling into your bucket with a dull thud. You climb out of the vat, legs trembling slightly from crouching for so long. The brewer dumps a ladleful of fresh water into the vat, sloshes it around, and nods his approval. Your shift, mercifully, is over. You stagger outside into the cool air, breathing deeply, the breeze whisking away the thick brewery scent clinging to you. Your arms are heavy, your hair sticky, but you've survived yet another of the less glamorous careers the sagas never bother to mention. And now, the day is winding down. You picture the warriors feasting in the longhouse, slamming down cups of mead you helped make drinkable. You imagine the songs about their heroics, conveniently leaving out the part where someone had to clean the vats first. You chuckle to yourself. Then the sky deepens into twilight, the fjord glimmers in the fading light, and you feel the slow uncoiling of muscles that comes from knowing you've done your work, unpleasant though it was. The longhouse glows softly in the distance, a beacon of warmth against the cool night air. You walk slowly now, each step measured, each breath deep and calm. The smell of wood smoke drifts towards you, carrying with it the promise of rest. Behind you, the day's labors fade into the shadows. Ahead, there is only the sound of low voices, the flicker of firelight, and the thought of laying your head down on a simple bed of furs. In the hush of evening, the world feels smaller, kinder, and in that quiet moment, you drift toward dreams, safe and still.